And on today's episode for this podcast, we're gonna be talking about Alexander McQueen's life and his trajectory. Alexander McQueen, a successful and inspiring designer who had tragedy as his muse. Lee Alexander was born in London, England in 1969. His father worked as a taxi driver while his mom was a teacher. He grew up in the middle of 6 siblings, and as we can see in his documentary, since he was just a kid, his mind was completely focused on fashion. He always was curious, even trying to make pieces for his 3 sisters. So, as just a child, he was already getting sewing skills until his passion became an obsession. That's why at the age of 16, he dropped school in order for him to take a tailoring course at Newham College. Now, let's take in mind how he made this big decision surrounded by a middle-class family with no artistic background at all or any fashion interest. So it seems like a risky and unsupported scenario, but however, he was pretty aware of his tailoring skills and he trusted on himself and on his talent. After finishing his tailoring course, he landed himself an internship at Anderson and Shepherd. That was a bespoke tailoring shop located on Savile Row in London. So this internship was highly prestigious, of course, and gave him great experience. He showed how he wasn't afraid of big things and new challenges. Cause let me tell you, this tailoring shop was in the middle of a luxurious street in the middle of London, so this was a big deal for him. There he learned the complex process of making a suit by hand. After his internship ended up, he moved to another tailor called Gibson Hawkes in the same luxurious street, Savile Row in London, and there he worked as a pattern cutter. Definitely, it was something different than what he was used to do, but this gave him the skills for that successful future approaching, of course. And he was every time with every job just becoming a more and more complete designer, just taking notes and learning from every close construction process. He was trying to learn from every perspective the skills that one day will make him outstanding. Like, for example, his pattern making process was out of this world. He was impeccable doing that. At this point, it's safe to say that Alexander created a name for himself as one of the most promising young tailors on Savile Row. But something I want to highlight of this era on his career, it was that McQueen started to embrace his sense of rebelliousness that someday will become a defining part of his identity. And it was like a representation of his art through fashion. One of the most popular examples of this at that time, it was when he stitched "I am a cunt" into the lining of a jacket made for nothing more than Prince Charles. After Gibson Hawkes, he will start to work with a fashion house with a theatrical aesthetic that will inspire his creative process for the rest of his career. And if you have seen Alexander's pieces, you know what I'm saying. So when he worked here at this place, that it was called Angels and Berman, the fashion house. This awakened his love for dramatic looks, and I feel like his time working there explains a lot, because if you look at Alexander's amazing pieces and designs, it gives you the sense that everything was part of a movie or of a play. And not to mention that, okay, this is hard to believe, but everything that I've told you that he accomplished, all of this, by this time, he was only 21 years old, which is crazy. He had definitely a strong resume that gave him the confidence to apply for the Central Saint Martin Fashion School as a teacher and not as a student. So he knew his value and talent, but unfortunately for him, he wasn't old enough for that job position. But however, the school offered him a master program invitation that he ended up accepting. And in 1992, he created his iconic and controversial collection called Jack the Ripper Stalks His Victims. But remember, he haven't created his label at this point. It is just an academic project where he had for the first time full control over the design process. So this was a dark collection, and I feel it was the end of nonsense fashion for Alexander. And instead, it was the beginning of collections with stories and him putting his mind perspective talking through his fashion. Talking a little bit of his collection, he showed his fine taste for patterns, constructions, and fine fabrics. He gave us Victorian looks, and there was this coat, for example, where the patterns give the sensation that is a skin grab with barbed wire.
And extravagance
and he
were
even
a very
saw
strong first
his
impression.
own hair
And here arrives
to some
one
of
person
his
that was
garment
important
as a
in Alexander's
representation of
personal and professional
a
life.
trend in the
Her name was
Victorian era.
Isabella Blau. She was a stylist and magazine editor that was in the audience that day. She was so fascinated with the collection that she decided to buy it for almost $7,000 at that time. She definitely saw his potential. And with this graduation collection, he could have gone to any fashion house and find a job as a designer assistant. But he wanted to start his own label, and Isabella was the one who made this possible. She was like his mentor. Alexander started to work on his debut collection, and due to his incredible trajectory, he was selected by the British Fashion Council to have his work shown at London Fashion Week, a great opportunity to show his pieces. His collection was called Taxi Driver. In 1994, he launched his Nihilins collection, which brought him attention from the press, and he was the one that put his name. He received a lot of negative press, but at the end of the day, he got people's attention. Later on, people will start to understand his perspective. And the whole controversy helped him build the rebellious person he wanted to become. With all the eyes on him in 1996, he was named the new creative director of Givenchy. Alexander had a more radical style, and while he was working at Givenchy, his own label was doing incredible. Actually, his most iconic and remarkable collections went out while he was still working on Givenchy. One of the most famous examples was his 1999 collection called 13, when Lee made runway history when a model's white dress was spray painted by two robots. Another example I have is when in 2006 he supported Kate Moss after a drugs scandal she was on, and he displayed an hologram of her with a beautiful dress. I felt like this broke walls for me because this wasn't just futuristic, but it also introduced fashion to a digital era. This shows how innovative he was and his talent of making good art performances. I want to mention a few more iconic runways that made Alexander McQueen a fashion mastermind. In 2001, he recreated an insane asylum atmosphere, a combination of fantasy and a nightmare, where I think he spoke up his mind about his mental health issues at the time. He was all about creating feelings. The outfits were outstanding for sure. The Gucci group purchased his namesake label and made McQueen's name a global brand as we know it now. So everything was going great for Alexander as a designer, but his personal life was falling apart. His job showed his fascination for darkness and death, and it was revealed later on that he dealt with addictions and suffered abuse. In 2007, his former mentor, Isabella, committed suicide. Even though she wasn't his friend anymore, Alexander showed his love, dedicating an entire collection called La Dame Blue. and it was a vibrant collection. In 2009, he presented his last collection titled Platos Atlantis, and on February 11th of 2010, 1 week after his mother died, Alexander committed suicide at his home in London. It was devastating news for the fashion industry, and his fans were heartbroken. He was an unique influence and he impacted fashion forever. Before his death, he started to work on a 2010 collection called Angels and Demons. And people think this collection is like sad poesy. The reason why it's because the concept was centered around the afterlife. His influence
Thank you so much
will
for
live
listening
forever,
the whole
and
episode,
so
and I
will
hope you
his
have a great
label.
day.
After he passed, Sarah Burton, a fashion designer that continued to run the label,